Depp trial is almost over. We're waiting for the jury to come back with their verdict. It's been a journey. If you're wondering why this trial was so compelling to millions, including me, I can tell you, plain and simple. Anyone who's experienced narcissistic gaslighting and abuse recognized from the evidence and the testimony who the abuser was. And collectively, we all realized it wasn't Depp. As we await the verdict, I'd like to share 6 things I learned from watching this trial. Lesson 1. DV survivors can spot gaslighting a mile away. On Twitter, I noticed that the DV survivors in my circle were quick to support Depp. Why is that? It's not just about celebrity, because many of them weren't fans. If you've been on the receiving end of abuse, you know what it's like to feel gaslit and lied to, and you root for the truth to come out, not just for Depp, but for everyone who's ever dealt with narcissistic abuse and then watched their abuser waltz away to charm the next true believer. Lesson 2. A shameless griefer co-opted the metoo movement. When the allegations against Depp first came out years ago, my knee-jerk reaction was to believe them. The metoo movement was in full swing, and it felt like part of a much-needed house cleaning in the entertainment industry. I wasn't a Depp fan. I read a few articles and couldn't imagine why someone would make up those stories of abuse, especially someone who donated their multi-million-dollar divorce settlement to charity. And then I watched the trial and saw the evidence and listened to a litany of easily disprovable lies coming from Amber Heard. And my heart sank. I'd been duped along with millions of others. The evidence and the data made it blatantly clear that she hadn't donated her settlement and hadn't suffered the horrific abuse that she claimed. And unlike Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein, there weren't any corroborating authentic Me Too voices to back up her story. And then numerous women from Depp's past stepped up and denied the abuse. And then it came out that Heard had a documented domestic violence record that she'd fought hard to hide and deny. I'm ashamed that I believed her so quickly. I learned from that. I feel conned, and I know I'm not alone in that feeling. Lesson 3. Psych tests are powerful, and they can be easily abused. During the trial, Heard relied on testimony from Dr. Dawn Hughes, an expert with an impressive resume, to back up her claims of suffering PTSD due to IPV, intimate partner violence. But Dr. Hughes' testimony was littered with tells that revealed her bias and unprofessionalism, as Dr. Curry pointed out in her rebuttal.
Dr. Hughes generally said that testing supported PTSD and that there was an etiology for her trauma of intimate partner violence. She did say that the elevation on the trauma symptom inventory validity scale is consistent with PTSD, and that's simply not true. That scale was designed and has been tested and shown to be there to show when somebody is endorsing extremely unusual items that are not consistent with PTSD. She scored more of those unusual items than 98% of people who have ever taken that test. When you're looking at scores as high as Ms. Heard's, and then you're not seeing indications of PTSD in the more subtle tests where she doesn't know what she's endorsing, it's good evidence that her over-endorsement on that one test is because of the reason the scale was made, to detect exaggeration and feigning of symptoms. When you are in the role of an expert witness, our ethics talk about the responsibility we have to distinguish between data, then inferences we're making from that data, what the data can mean, and then what my ultimate opinion is, integrating all of that data. And it's very important that we clarify that to the fact finder, to the judge, the jury. That's our responsibility, that we do not cloak personal opinions or the self-report of an examinee as an expert fact or somehow scientifically based.
When did Dr. Hughes do this most?
She did this most when describing instances of alleged IPV. And there's also an issue there because one of our ethics also discusses the importance of relevance and constraining our testimony to the data and not including personal information that unnecessarily compromises the dignity of any of the litigants. She provided a lot of Ms. Heard's report to her, the allegations of abuse, when describing Mr. Depp, who she had not examined, when describing Mr. Depp's behavior, his motivations. I believe she used the word obsessive jealousy quite a few times, talked about Ms. Heard being in a highly dangerous situation. These are simply things that we cannot detect based on testing and a psychological evaluation. We can only describe an individual, not whether or not IPV has occurred. And we certainly shouldn't go into explicit details about sexual encounters or other things that are highly prejudicial, shocking, and hard to forget.
So I learned that, like any powerful tool, psych tests can be used well and misused terribly. That's why it's so important to use the scientific method when you're searching for the truth. Lesson 4, data and evidence can change your mental model. Dr. Curry's diagnosis was based on data, and she used well-established protocols in her testing methods. And it shows because her diagnosis was eerily predictive of what we saw play out live during the trial. For example, here's some of the behaviors that Dr. Curry described as part of her diagnosis.
When somebody is afraid of being abandoned by their partner or by anybody else in their environment and they have this disorder, they'll make desperate attempts to prevent that from happening. And those desperate attempts could be physical aggression, it could be threatening, it could be harming themselves. You'll see relationships start very intensely. Somebody with borderline personality disorder perceives the relationship as extremely close, and their engagement in the relationship is very alluring, very charming to the other person. So initially, everything seems great. But what occurs is that reality sets in. People are not perfect, even when we have a lot in common with them. What you're going to see is extreme discomfort with not being the center of attention, extreme efforts to be the center of attention. And when they feel that they're not the center of attention, you will see some strange things, making up stories to try to get attention, often taking on a victim or princess role. Those two roles in particular are pretty consistent. Seeking caretaking. The person with borderline personality disorder, things are in these extremes, this black and white, we call it splitting. And so that person goes from being idealized, the perfect person, to dumpster. They are totally devalued. They are the worst friend. They don't care anything about me. I have better people around. And then there will be a repair, because the person with this disorder does feel remorseful after they have these reactions, angry, tell their friend off. But over time, it wears away at these relationships.
When they're applied with discipline, psychological tests are a powerful way to create a predictive mental model. But like any tool, they can be used in the wrong way and can lead you further away from the truth. Lesson 5. Believe all women got weaponized, and it sucks. The pendulum of public opinion swings back and forth. And right now in mid-2022, there are a lot of forces pushing back on women's progress. And that's what makes this case so heartbreaking. With her self-serving lies, Heard weaponized the metoo movement and made it harder for women who truly suffer abuse to come forth and be believed. But there's a silver lining to this as well, which is the abuse has no gender #movement. Men who suffer abuse are often too humiliated and intimidated to come forth, and when they do, they're often mocked and not believed. Hopefully, this trial has raised our awareness. It certainly impacted mine. And when you think about it, the slogan, "Believe all women," while well-meaning, is deeply sexist because women are people, and people can be awful. For example, what if we applied "Believe all women" to Amy Cooper, the Central Park Karen, who called the police and said her life was being threatened when a black birder asked her politely to leash her dog in an area where it was required? Or Carolyn Bryant, the woman who told local authorities that Emmett Till had looked at her funny and flirted. We need to take serious allegations seriously and not condemn or believe anyone solely based on gender. Lesson 6. When you think you've nailed motivation, look at the data. as I listened to the evidence and testimony in the Depp trial unfold, I had an epiphany about motivation that changed my point of view and my mental model of the situation. I see the same thing happen with my startup clients all the time. You think you understand your customer's motivation, and then you do some research, and that's when the clouds part and clarity shines through. And guess what? It's not always the picture that you want to see. And if you're honest with yourself and really want to find the truth, that's the moment when you change your mind. I saw this recently with a startup client who assumed that his customers were motivated by status seeking and wanting to show off, but through research, we found that they were motivated by high-minded ideals and effective collective action. And to his great credit, he pivoted his startup's whole product focus, which was difficult, but ultimately the winning move and the smart thing to do. I'm curious, now, what about you? Have you ever changed your thinking because of data and evidence? If you have, tell me about it in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe if you want to get more great content about the psychology of motivation. I'll see you next week.